Let me tell you a story about a man with a dream, a writer of science fiction and self-help horseshit who used his popular books to gather a large organization of followers, and he spent much of the rest of his life dodging taxes for the massive amounts of wealth that he had accrued by conning those followers. Finally, after years of struggle, he managed to achieve his dreams of having his organization turned into a recognized religion in the United States, and thus earning that sweet, sweet tax-exempt status. That man, L. Ron Hubbard. That religion, Scientology. So get ready, put on your black turtleneck sweaters, and prepare to laugh maniacally because the book I'm looking at today is all about Scientology. Beyond Belief: My Secret Life Inside Scientology and My Harrowing Escape, by Jenna Miscavige Hill, the niece of David Miscavige, the current head of Scientology who took over for L. Ron Hubbard after he died. Jenna was born into Scientology. Her entire family got pulled into it, but she lived a relatively normal life at first. That is until the age of about 6, where L. Ron Hubbard passes away and her uncle takes over. She's inducted into the elite core group within Scientology called the Sea Org, and is made to sign this multi-billion-year contract where she swears all of her future lives to servitude of the church. And then she's basically brought to a child labor camp where she lives many of the next years of her life. Over the course of the story, fractures begin to appear in not only her belief system, but between members of her family. And as that happens, things get a lot weirder, a lot crazier with what she's seeing in the church, until she's eventually woken the fuck up and realizes she needs to get out. Now, in the interest of fairness, I should point out right off the bat that Scientology is a recognized religion in many places. It just so happens that it bears a lot of characteristics of what we call a cult. And of course you can say, well, you know, all religions are cults, anthropologically speaking, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the colloquial definition of cult as distinct from your regular run-of-the-mill religions. Of course, there's a lot of debate about the way to define this, but basically it all boils down to extreme levels of control and micromanagement of the individual, with the goal of erasing that person's individuality, controlling information that the person has access to, who they can associate with, excommunicating members that decide to walk away, and these intense group mentality, humiliation, and punishment rituals. Scientology checks all of those boxes in spades, especially within the Sea Org, which is basically a cult within a cult. Jenna doesn't dive too much into cults or the psychology that allows them to operate. She doesn't take a step back to analyze or assess Scientology in a broader context. Instead, her memoir really focuses in on her experiences and feelings within the church as she navigates all the crazy stuff that happens to her. This makes it really friendly for casual readers, but it also means that it's far from definitive reading. The other thing is that her proximity to powerful members within the church tends to insulate her from some of the worst abuses I've heard of from Scientology. So the book also won't be quite as dark as you're expecting, although it definitely goes into some pretty disturbing territory. While the things that Jenna describes throughout the book are definitely interesting and even suspenseful at times, her prose doesn't exactly leap off the page. She takes a pretty mild tone throughout the book, and mostly just recites things as she remembers them, with not too many insights. In spite of that, though, I was motivated to keep reading just by the Kafkaesque weirdness of it all. And while I knew quite a bit about Scientology before I went into this, I still learned quite a bit. My biggest takeaway from this book is just how different it is to be a run-of-the-mill Scientologist versus a Sea Org member. If you're just a regular Scientologist, you might live a relatively normal life, other than the fact that you're getting scammed out of every last dollar that you earn on the side. but if you're in the Sea Org, you live and breathe Scientology. You basically become a Scientology zombie. And I thought that was a pretty interesting thing to watch play out. Once I got over the initial shock and novelty of seeing what it's like to live on a cult encampment, the book started to drag for me. It turns out that growing up inside of a cult is mostly just really boring. The first half of this book, like I said, is focused on the mundane elements of Scientology. There are the occasional capers within the first half, like when she tries to run away or her first experience of life outside of her cult encampment, but for the most part I was feeling kinda let down. And then I hit the second half of the book, and that's where things really picked up. This is because Jenna is coming of age as a Sea Org member, and so she's expected to take on all these new responsibilities and all this training to make her an elite person who can convert people, who can do auditing sessions, and all this other stuff. So she's really getting a sneak peek into just how deep this Scientology rabbit hole goes. There's all this behavior modification coming into play. They have these sessions where they're screaming at inanimate objects like ashtrays to try and infuse their will into them. And then there are these long sessions where they're locked in a room with another person who is screaming at them, humiliating them verbally, degrading them, saying whatever they want to them, and the other person's just supposed to sit there and take it without reacting. So there are some instances, for example, where you've got teenage boys saying the most horrifically sexually degrading things they can to minors, like 12-year-old girls. On the other hand, you have these moments that are hilarious just in how absurd they are. For example, another thing that Scientologists do is accuse each other of indiscretions because this little meter that they use to read people is saying, oh, you're hiding something from me, is there something you want to confess? And you have to go through all of this rigmarole of being accused and denying it until eventually Jenna starts inventing shit. And because Scientologists believe in all these past lives extending all across the galaxy with like science fiction logic, she can say things like, oh yeah, 1 billion years ago I was a all-powerful entity that went around destroying civilizations on other planets, and they will accept that and say, okay, you're clear of this past transgression, and a lot of the other kids do it too. So you're kind of weaving between these really disturbing, creepy moments and moments that make you laugh out loud. Add into that mix the fact that this is around the time where Jenna starts encountering people that are questioning Scientology or even leaving the church. This is also where there's a lot of rifts between her and members of her family. There's all this teenage angst coming into it, like this cliquishness and young love. So it ends up feeling a lot like a high school drama set within a cult. My favorite parts of this book are towards the end, when she finally really starts standing up for herself. All of a sudden, these abusive authority figures that have held sway over every aspect of her life are starting to crumble in her own mind, and I was rooting for her every step of the way, to the point where I was yelling encouragement at the book as I was reading. Part of this is because I kind of relate to this process of deconstructing from her own religion that she goes through. It's not a 180 simple turnaround. It's this gradual sort of back and forth. Sometimes it makes you double down or come up with new justifications for staying. So I was pulling my hair out with frustration some moments, and other moments I was just like, yeah, she's seeing the light or whatever. And then it finalizes in this very cathartic moment. It's very touching, and then the way that she turns around and dedicates her life to raising awareness against the abuses happening within Scientology are a really great note to go out on. I would give Beyond Belief a 6.5 out of 10, maybe a 6. And I hope that doesn't sound too critical, because while this book definitely needed a better editor and could have been tightened up quite a bit, it had a pretty enjoyable and personal second half that I really enjoyed reading. It could have been a little bit more insightful, so I think if you want a primer for Scientology before you go into it, I would highly recommend the documentary Going Clear. I think that's a great overview of Scientology. But anyway, another thing that this book imparted on me was a lack of fear about Scientologists, because, you know, We've all heard the horror stories about how Scientologists employ gang stalking and harassment techniques, or utilize their vast legal resources to terrify and silence their critics. Well, the Scientologists I saw in this book were flailing and feeble at best. I'm going to demonstrate how unafraid of Scientologists I am by passing this book along. I got it from a mini free library, so I'm going to pass it into another mini free library, preferably one that's as close to the local Scientology chapter as I can, even if it doesn't make its way into the hands of a Scientologist to wake them the fuck up. Maybe it'll make its way into the hands of someone who otherwise might have been conned by Scientologists in their area. But yeah, that's me. I've been deep in the reads. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.